Fine, thanks.
Good, well done.
Okay, Chair, we're now live to the public and recording the meeting. Oh, can you hear me? Sorry, Chair, did you hear me? We're live to the public and recording the meeting now.
Thanks, Sue. I wasn't able to take myself off unmute there. Good morning and welcome to East Devon District Council's Virtual Standards Committee meeting on the 23rd of April 2021. I am your Chair, Councillor Cathy Gardner. I'd also like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live streaming. All participants here today are taking part remotely, and as well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded, so please bear this in mind throughout, and may I remind you to be careful with your language. May I also remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout this meeting. We also reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. As this meeting is dependent on an internet connection, in the event of a break in connection or a power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if we're not able to reconnect, we will consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please make sure all phones are turned off or are on silent, and make sure all microphones are muted when you're not speaking to avoid any background noise levels. Keep points short and do not repeat points that have already been made. And please do not interrupt. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic hand and wait to be called. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members here present. Can you please now unmute your microphone, and when you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. When you have confirmed you are present, please mute your microphone again. Sue?
Okay. Councillor Gardner.
Present.
Councillor Rylance.
Present.
Mr. Martin Goscombe.
Present.
Councillor Nelson.
Can you hear me?
Councillor Stott.
Yeah, present.
Thank you, Chair. That's all. Over to you.
Thank you. I think we are quorate, if only just this morning, being a very small committee. And welcome also to Alison Willand, our independent person, who's also present. Agenda item 1, public speaking. There are no members of the public registered to speak. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. If there are any members with comments on the minutes of the 19th of January 2021, please raise your electronic hand. If I have no hands raised, I'll take this as an indication you all agree to the minutes of the previous meeting. I don't see any hands, so those minutes are agreed. Agenda item 3 is apologies. Sue, can you please confirm the apologies received?
Yes, of course, Chair. Councillor Barrow, Councillor Bond, Councillor Twiss, and Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. Agenda item 4, declarations of interest. Can we have a roll call for any declarations of interest?
Okay.
Shall I declare that I'm a member of Exmouth Town Council? I don't know whether I should declare that. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you'd like to.
Okay. Shall I just run through Councillor Gardner?
None that I'm aware of at present, thanks.
Councillor Rylance?
Well, if we're declaring memberships of parish councils, then I'm a member of Broadcliff Parish Council.
Okay. Mr. Martin Goscombe?
Nothing to declare.
No. And thank you, Councillor Stott. Okay, that over to you, Chair.
Agenda item 5 is matters of urgency. There are none. Agenda item 6, confidential or exempt items. There are no items which officers recommend should be dealt with in this way. So our item this morning, or the main item this morning, I think, agenda item 7, EDDC standards regime update. A report will be presented by the monitoring officer, Henry Gordon-Lennox. Henry?
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. So the report covers a number of areas, and I'll go through them all in turn. The first and probably the most important is the discussions that have been ongoing now through various meetings of the Standards Committee to do with the complaints procedure and possible instruction of an assessment subcommittee. So what's before you, following from the last meeting, is a sort of a more detailed proposal for that. It brings together various different aspects and puts it all into one document. It seeks to ensure that the recommendations from the Committee for Standards and Public Life report in relation to standards are all addressed, which they are. But the crucial bit really is the introduction of the assessment subcommittee into the process. It's all detailed in the report, so I won't go through it in detail now. I'm happy to take any questions on that, but the critical point is that you're introducing a member assessment early in the process. Otherwise, the process sort of runs as was. The procedure, the composite procedure document is attached, and I'll come back to just a couple of things to note on that. The other changes that will be necessary as a consequence are increasing the size of the Standards Committee from 5 to 7. Is the recommendation, and also an additional appointments to the 2 independent or co-opted positions of the town and parish rep and the independent rep. So we need to go out to recruitment for 2 more positions. If I can quickly touch on the procedure, as I say, it's there. I'm sure you've all read it. We'll no doubt discuss it and go through any questions there may be. But there are 2 specific changes to Appendix 1, which is the flow chart. One's a small typo in the box where it says it's stage 6, when in fact it should be stage 5. That's the standards hearing subcommittee stage. And then the other is I've had a conversation with the chair about informal resolution at stage 1 not appearing in the box, and I think it ought to be included there to make it clear that it is an option if that's what the committee agree as appropriate. So those would be the 2 changes that I think are necessary to be made. So it's for you to consider as a committee, but my recommendation would be that this is now put forward to council on the terms set out in the report and the appended document for approval as a new process. Also touched on previous reports was the support for me. I know it's been noted prior to this meeting, a sort of backlog of complaints that need to be addressed. We'll come on to that shortly. Cabinet have recommended to council that an additional lawyer post is recruited to help free up the deputy monitoring officer to carry out more conduct related work as well. Previously I'd flagged it as possibly a recommendation from this committee, but of course with Cabinet now having made the recommendation to council for next week, I'm simply asking that you endorse that recommendation. The committee will need to consider the position on training. The procedure as is written advocates that members pay for their own training if that is a sanction or remedial step required by the committee, but that hadn't been formally decided, so you'll need to consider that and how you want to go, and we may need to tweak the procedure if you come to a different view. And unfortunately Alison's just dropped out of the meeting, but the last perhaps I can wait till she comes back in so she can actually hear it. Is to give my thanks to Alison for her hard work for 9 years. So perhaps when she comes back in, I can. Oh, here she is. Is she back there? No, it's not. Oh, there you are, Alison. Yes, it's to thank you very much for all your hard work and support over the last 9 years to the district council as the independent person. You've been invaluable. So my thanks, and I'm sure the committee will thank you too. So those are the recommendations, Chair, and I'm happy to discuss and take any questions there may be.
Thank you, Henry. Yes, I think probably the thing we should deal with first is our thanks to Alison for her work. I can't believe that you've managed to do that role for 9 years. That you should have some kind of long service medal. That's an amazing contribution. So thank you very much, and I'm sure all the members of the committee would like to thank you for that amazing length of service. Thank you. And we did have a whole day of interviews this week to recruit 2 new independent people, which hopefully we've seen good success from. So we've got a whole new lot of people coming in. Thanks, Alison.
I want to just say, Chair, if you don't mind, that Alison's very kindly agreed to meet with them as a sort of form of handover as well, which is very kind of her.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thanks, Alison. Because it was quite hard for us to explain the role, really. And I think your experience of the work that you do with Henry in the background, that would be brilliant for you to talk to them. Thanks. Thank you. Going back to the recommendations then, I saw Martin waved his hand. Martin, which recommendation would you like to speak on?
I had just a point of clarification on what Henry was saying about the additional solicitor. Just to know, is that going to be a full-time role or a part-time role?
It's a full-time. It will be a full-time position, but the idea being that some of the complaint work will be picked up by the lawyers in terms of the investigative side of it. But more acutely, it frees up the deputy monitoring officer as well from some of the transactional work, if I can call it that, to have a greater role in governance, actually generally, but complaints specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a couple of comments because I know we've been talking about this for quite a while. The new procedure at recommendation 1. As Henry mentioned, I went through the process and I asked him a few questions about it, and he's amended the flow chart because I realised that something was discussed in the process, but it wasn't mentioned in the flow chart. And something that I'm really keen on is that we always make sure that the process is really transparent by having the criteria that are used at each stage of the decision-making process published, so that people understand how something has been decided. If it's not carried forward or not decided that it won't be investigated, then what criteria have been used. And I think that's been improved in this process with really clear criteria. And I think the other aspect of this whole process that I would like to see is that it's obvious the process is consistent because decisions are made according to criteria as far as possible, and also that the process is commented on by members and not just by Henry, so that members on standards are aware of the complaints coming through, although not the details of them, but certainly the subject, the issues at hand, and that makes the process a little bit more transparent as well as obviously consistent. And I think that can only be a good thing. Eleanor, do you have specific comments?
I had a specific question actually, because I thought that in January we'd talked about how people would sit on a sort of assessment subcommittee, and I thought we'd talked about potentially asking people at random rather than having people put forwards to sit on this subcommittee routinely, in order to expose as many different people as possible to the discipline procedure. So to speak, so that they were aware of the standards. And I wonder, is that something that we're taking forwards? Are we going to be treating it like jury service rather than having some people appointed to such a committee? So, people will be chosen at random, really, basically, out of the membership.
Henry, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so that's not how it's being put forward. The difficulty in part is well, I suppose the theory behind that is, yes, of course you could open it up to 60 members and have a sort of lottery draw as to who does it, but there is a degree of I don't want to say expertise, but knowledge gained throughout the process, and also the ability to apply it even-handedly as the members as well. So for me, I think I can understand the desire for a wider pool and everybody gaining experience, but equally I think the knowledge and expertise that comes with sitting is invaluably gained and contained, if you like, by having the group. So partly you could in theory make the standards committee bigger than 7. I think today has probably demonstrated actually that having a bigger committee of the district councillors at least it is probably valuable. What I didn't want to do was come all guns blazing and say, let's have 30 councillors on the standards committee, because it would make the normal work of the standards committee all the more difficult, I think. So I think there's a balance to be struck, isn't it? But I've recommended 7, but you could equally go higher, and we could certainly advocate a policy of rotating that within the election cycle, so it's not always the same people who sit, although again you're back to the same problem of trying to get the knowledge or keep the knowledge and the experience. So I've recommended 7 to try and keep it sort of containable, but actually if you wanted to increase that size, I would certainly have no objection to it, and you know, in a sense I'd probably encourage it. I think I just didn't want to come in and start asking for another 12, 15, because I know some groups have problems filling seats. So yeah, if you wanted to increase the size beyond 7, that would be absolutely fine. But I wouldn't advocate a pool out of the 60 councillors for the subcommittee.
Thank you, Henry. Yes, I think on that subject about rotating members, I think it probably is wise to start off a new scheme, if it's approved at full council, with a set group who can get the process working. I think it might need tweaking anyway as it progresses. Changes might need to be made if we find that it's not working as well as it could. And that also in the future may be an opportunity to look at rotation of members too, but perhaps one step at a time. So I think Eleanor's point is a good one about bringing more people in, but perhaps, you know, in a couple of changes time, that might be looked at when things are working, rather than trying to do it straight away. Eleanor, another question?
I had an idea actually. Why don't we go up to 9 and do a sort of rotation system in thirds? So every year, 3 of the members are replaced by 3 others. So you keep a nucleus of 6 people who actually know what they're doing, bring in three fresh ones every year, and then people who really maybe don't want to be committee anymore can come off, and then people who do want to be on can go on.
So the chair has to sit on standards. So you're not 9, you're 8, essentially. But the theory, you could go 10 and have 9 rotating rounds, so you could do thirds that way. Certainly, I wouldn't have a problem with that. The only difficulty legally you've got is that it's the group's wishes as to who they would want to appoint. So you're imposing a requirement that may not necessarily sit with the expectations of the legislation in terms of people being able to choose who they appoint, or at least artificially restricting that perhaps. So it's certainly something we could look at, and I've got no problem if you want to say 10 now and sort of set the platform for it, and then we could look at it. I'm easy, but I wouldn't want us to say now without proper consideration whether or not whether rotating 3 out each year would work. So I need to think more about that.
Oh, so what you're saying, Henry, is that we can't force people to leave standards because the groups have the legal right to decide who they appoint to each group.
Yes, yeah. So, and that's not to say that the tension there is if you've got a big enough pool of councillors who you could rotate round, well, then you may be able to agree it and make it work. I think it is probably in contrast or in conflict with the legal requirement of it's the wishes of the group who they want to appoint to those committees. So I wouldn't want to say yes without definitively checking that. But you could have an aspiration to say we would like councillors to rotate through so they get the experience and understanding. But I don't think you'll be able to compel it. That will be my position at the moment.
Okay, so it sounds as though, as I said a couple of minutes ago, it might be something to consider over the next few months if this goes ahead, how that might be done to improve the way it works. We can certainly look at it. I think, like you, Chair, I would agree that if we're going to change it, get it changed now and come back to that once it's settled down. Because as you say, there'll probably be other changes that need to come through, and you could look at it at a later date. I can see that other changes may well have to be made to the process, just fine tuning as it goes through, and a good opportunity to look at membership as well. Any other questions about relating to recommendation 1 and the procedures? Martin?
Yes, I've got a few. I read carefully the whole document. Page 19, second penultimate paragraph at the bottom of the page. This is for Henry, really. The first line refers to information resolution, which I imagine should read informal resolution.
Sorry, I haven't got the page numbered version actually. Which paragraph is this?
This is This is the third one. It's difficult without page numbers, Henry. I've got a printed version. Sorry,
let me go back to the agenda. I do have the agenda open. Hang on. Sorry, page 19.
First line of the penultimate paragraph.
If yes, beg your pardon. Yeah.
Okay. And then on page 21, the paragraph at the top, where it's talking about monitoring officer investigation, stage 3, it says that the monitoring officer or a sufficiently experienced officer of the council or an external investigator.
Yeah.
A bit confused as to why an external investigator would be referred to at this point, when the stage 4 is naturally about an external investigator.
So yes, the independent investigation is external, but it is under the umbrella of independent investigation as opposed to the earlier step of investigation. So all I'm leaving open is the option that if internally we felt we couldn't do it, we do have the option to say to somebody, could you do it on our behalf? But it would still sit under the monitoring officer stage of the process. Whereas the independent investigation is a separate stage of the process and necessarily is done by somebody external.
And just in case, Henry, do you have the power to delegate to an officer from another force? Remember who I am. Another authority?
Yes.
You do. Good.
Can I just ask a related question about that point that Martin's raised? Presumably we would always want to avoid doing that because it's going to bring an extra cost to the process.
Yeah. So
Okay.
but there are, and again, the recommendations from the Committee for Standards in Public Life acknowledge that there will be circumstances where it's appropriate for the monitoring officer to refer it to another monitoring officer to deal with. A slightly different point, but clearly there will be situations where there may well be a conflict or a difficulty or a sufficient complexity that make it difficult to do in-house. So yes, you're absolutely right though. What we don't want to do is in everything else, and there's certainly no intention for that, but it's just to allow the flexibility for us to have the flexibility to be able to do it if necessary, but there's certainly no intention to be doing that.
Yeah, because I think one of the other things that appealed to me of adding in this extra step in the process is it could reduce the costs of external investigation if the subcommittee decides that it doesn't warrant that extra cost, because it is an expensive process.
Yeah.
Martin, do you have further questions?
I'm afraid I've got two more detailed questions. Page 22, paragraph 6.3. Again, this is for Henry, really. The final sentence, bearing in mind we're talking about we're talking about what it says is where the decision follows referral from stage 3, the decision detailing the findings will be published on the council's website. Well, it would be only if the circumstances justified it. So I was just a bit curious about the wording there. It's right, but it wouldn't apply in every case where there's a decision. If the decision is not to, if the decision, for example, was that there was no case to answer, and then in that case there'd be nothing to publish. So I was just a bit curious about the wording there.
So, forgive me, the dates have gone out of my head now, but probably it must have been back end of 19, I think. No, 20. Sorry, so October's committee, I think it must have been. The committee agreed that the decision notices of breach or breach decision notices where I found a breach will be published now.
Yeah.
So as of the beginning of this year, decisions that are taken where there's a breach, they'll be published.
Okay.
If there's a no finding or breach, no finding of breach, the subject member will have the choice still to publish, as was the case. And I mean, so we've rehearsed why that is. Now, under this procedure, and the distinction between the stage 2 and stage 3 is that stage 2 continues to reflect that if I find no breach, the subject member has the choice. If I find breach, then it's published. Now, stage 3. Oh, hang on, sorry. Sorry, I think I got myself slightly confused. Hang on, wait a second. Yes, sorry. So stage 3 is because it's gone to independent investigation, the decision will already be published. My decision will have been published because it will only get to independent investigation following a breach finding, which the subject member doesn't accept. So the decision will be out there. So the reason that there's no problem with it being published at independent investigation stage is it continues there, and then the subject member, whether it's a breach or no breach, that decision sort of closes the circle.
Okay, that's helpful, Henry. And the very last point was on page 26, which is talking about the available sanctions. So this is subparagraph K, which is talking about withdrawing computer, website, email, and internet access from the councillor, which I was a wee bit nervous about.
Yes.
Sufficient for me to do a bit of checking around, really, to try and see what other authorities seem to be doing. And in particular, I came across, and you may be familiar with some wording that actually was contained under Wiltshire Council procedures, where they refer to the case of RV Broadland District Council, ex parte Lashley Court, and to cut to the chase, whilst they acknowledge that in certain circumstances it might be appropriate to withdraw certain facilities from a councillor, such as computer, email, or internet access, this should not interfere with the democratic process and should not be used as a punitive measure, nor in particular to justify the suspension or disqualification of a member. And I was just nervous that the way we've got it at the moment doesn't really provide enough protection to councillors who may have made a mistake and then suddenly find they've lost all their accesses. And I suspect in the modern world, you can't be a councillor without having access to things like internet and email and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I'm not sure whether you were in, but during the interview process, in one of the breaks, we had a quick conversation about this, and absolutely, you probably recall I said that it can't be used to stop the councillor carrying out their business. So I'm very happy that I add some wording along those lines to make it clear that it's not about precluding the councillor from being able to carry out their sort of councillor functions.
Thank you, and I'm very happy, Henry, to let you have that wording, which may help you.
I do have it actually. I've got because I use theirs as one of the ones that I use to assess. So I can. Thank you.
Thank you. So sorry to go through a few details.
Yeah, that's it.
No, that's good. That's what we're here for. Pauline.
Thank you. Just going back on Martin's point on the page 21 about the sanctions will be published. I think that's really most important, because if you're innocent, then you want people to know that you're innocent. And I've been through the process, and when you're found in the papers that you're found guilty before you've been even proved innocent, then I think, I spent a year in the process and it was really hard. And for anybody else who's innocent, I think it should be published everywhere, because the papers won't publish it normally. So I think that's a good move. Thank you.
Thanks. And I think the committee decided, as Henry said a few months back, that guilty finding of breach would now always be published, rather than only the ones that make it through to a hearing. And is it correct then, as you said, Henry, that it's up to the subject members if they want to publish when it isn't a requirement? They can ask for that decision to be published.
Yeah, so if it's a finding of no breach, they retain the choice whether to publish or not, and that's reflective of the fact that the process is still confidential up until that point, because it's the no smoke without fire argument, which I think is entirely fair. That if somebody has 15 complaints made against them, all spurious, and they were published, people will say, well, there must be something going on if it's 15 complaints. So they have the right, but and I have to say that actually there aren't that many who choose to publish currently with a no finding. Most people are just happy to let it slide, because of course it's not out in the wider domain. But I think the balance is struck correctly at that point, that you can choose not to publish if there's a finding of no breach.
Which may be necessary if for some reason it has got into the press, even though it should be confidential, that you then have the right to put forward the finding in the end. And I think, as Martin mentioned, in this process, we do have the point that if the monitoring officer finds that there's a breach, that decision is published, but it may then be that subsequently in the process there is a finding that there hasn't been a breach, in which case it's a correction of a publication of a result before. And I think that's the only difficulty that we've got in publishing a result before the end of the process. So what's the justification of publishing your finding, even though that's not the end of the process, Henry?
Well, it might be the end of the process. I suppose that's if it's accepted and the resolution that's agreed, or a resolution is agreed, then to all intents and purposes that is the end of the process. I think the discussion was a concern about the lack of transparency around the process and decision making. So at what point do you say then that the public are entitled to see the findings and the outcomes? Because effectively the first stage decision is a part of the process. Now, if they can follow it through to get it overturned, it'll be no different to being in court where you win on appeal. You've gone through and you've been vindicated at the end, but there's a process you've had to go through. But it would be strange for those early stages. Well, I say strange, I know that's how we ran it, but if you looked at the courts and said, well, you can't publish the first decision until you've run all your appeals, it would be fairly peculiar, I think. So there is a balance to be struck, and I'm conscious of the conversations that have happened. I think it's right that the breach notice is published, because that can be overturned and somebody can follow it all the way through the process.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions about the report, and particularly the standards process change? Not on that one. Is there any other comment about the second recommendation, approving or asking for the recruitment of an additional lawyer? No. Perhaps recommendation number 3, the issue of training. We do need to finally resolve that one today. It was a decision left hanging over from past meeting. I think we had the view, or several of us had the view, that the council couldn't pay for training, partly because East Devon may have a training budget, but town and parishes probably don't. Therefore, if we imposed training that councils had to pay for, we couldn't make sure that actually happened. Does anybody else have a comment on this? Because we will need a recommendation as to the answer on this one, potentially. Martin?
I think the first point was that at the last meeting, I particularly asked for some work to be done to find out what other authorities were doing with regard to this issue of training, because I think my words were East Devon's not an island, and it would still be very helpful to know what others are doing, so that we can feel that we're following good practice or best practice in this area.
Yeah. Apologies, I haven't been able to benchmark across the county, across Southwest. But those who I have had to look at, I've not seen anybody saying that training will be provided to the member. But that's not to say it doesn't happen. So, yeah, apologies, committee, if that was something that was on my task list. I think a bit like the committee size, that's probably one that we can come back to. For now, you can take the decision one way or the other, and I can certainly have that brought back. And it's only a small piece of work, in the sense of the committee wanted to change the procedure, to remove the requirement or to add something to say that members will pay. That will be absolutely fine. I can do that. So I think the principle, first and foremost, now if you can still make a decision on the principle, and then we can revisit what you want to do. At the moment, the procedure is written so that members are expected to pay for themselves. I'm happy you do it either way, but I think if we can have a decision and then revisit.
Martin.
I did have one thought when I was looking at the detailed procedure, which is, I think, on page 26, which is talking about the sanctions mostly. But I just wondered whether we might invert the issue so that we say something like, in exceptional circumstances, a training requirement may be the responsibility of the subject member to fund, so that would leave it to effectively to the discretion of the hearings subcommittee to decide that would be the outcome if it really was justified. So you might get a case where the authority had already paid for some training, and frankly the individual hadn't really given it the attention they should have done, and that the hearing subcommittee felt that there's no reason on earth why public money should be used again to provide some additional training, in which case that paragraph would be used to activate a decision to make them pay for this further training. But in other circumstances, shall we say normal circumstances, you might well form the view that training should just be paid for by the authority in the normal way.
Sorry,
If I think before Henry comments, I think at the moment we're in the situation where we can't require a member to pay or an authority to pay for training. Training has rarely been a sanction, and if it is, it can be done perhaps by Henry or through another mechanism. I think what we were wondering is whether we should put in a requirement or the ability for a council to pay for the members' training. And at the moment, we've decided perhaps we should wait. I think, don't we run into the other problem that we can't force a member to pay for training because we have no ability to do that?
Yes, and just sort of on a practical level, the budgetary issue as well of at the moment, yes, there's a member training budget, but it's spent because it's I think it's I might have to ask Sue, but I'm pretty sure it's going to have been spent on the training that's sort of programmed, if you like. So ad hoc training to deal with standards isn't there, and I think we have to sort out again through council getting a budget for that purpose. What budget do you set, and so on and so forth. So there's a practical difficulty which we'd have to think through. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You can't, as with all the sanctions, frankly, we can't compel members to adhere to the sanctions of the committee. The Taylor case was essentially clear that at the end of the day, that if a member is not going to play ball, the electorate will decide, and you can find another. You could go back through standards to have another finding that somebody hadn't complied with the previous findings of a subcommittee, and therefore it was a further breach of the code. But it becomes a perpetual cycle, and if they haven't complied first time, they're unlikely to comply second. But essentially that will then become an issue for the ballot box and for the public to decide whether they want this person to be a councillor. I do have real concerns, and whether it's reworded to give discretion, so make it sort of slightly more palatable as to how it's in comparison to how it's currently worded. That's fine, but it does worry me that you're opening a potential Pandora's box, particularly when we start to think about towns and parishes. In that, if we impose on a town and parishes, which hitherto has been the majority of the complaints, is there an expectation that public money is there an expectation that public money will then be used, save for an exceptional circumstance? It's the nuance of the wording, I think, and personally, I think it's right that training it's punitive, whether you see it as sanction as punitive or whatever, but at the end of the day, they have got themselves in that situation, and if there are exceptional circumstances that justify a departure, I think that's okay, and that's there. But I think the presumption sits that it would be funded by the member themselves. And as the chair says, on the vast majority of cases, it could be delivered locally. There's lots of online facilities. There's support from other organisations that may be able to help fund it as well. So it's not necessarily the member will have to pay for it. But I think the bigger question is, should East Devon be paying for it?
Thanks, Henry. Pauline?
I just wondered if it was an East Devon member, because they have allowances, can't it be taken out of their allowances? Because that's public money they're being paid for. And I was just wondering, if that is possible, because that might be a deterrent.
I can't remember if that question was asked last time. I think there's a difficult. I'd have to look. I don't know the answer off my head. My gut feel is that that's a difficult thing to do because they're entitled to the allowances. I don't think that's something that's a deduction, that you could take a deduction to force training in the same way that you can't compel them to do the training. So you could, if you deducted it and they don't do the training, it's sort of slightly counterintuitive, I think.
I think the other problem with that is effectively we'd be levying a fine, which again we don't have the legal power to do. So yeah, I know it seemed like it should be possible, but my gut feeling on this is that we're best leaving it as it is at the moment, really, and until Henry's perhaps able to come back and have a look at what the councils do, perhaps try and bring that to the next meeting. We should probably leave it alone because it's just fraught with so many difficulties. And given that most people would view the standards regime as effectively punitive, people are reported and found guilty of a breach because they've done something wrong, that councils then shouldn't be funding training. But forcing members to pay, I think, is also going to be impossible. So a difficult subject. It will be interesting to see what other councils do.
Can I suggest, Chair, perhaps that depending on how the debate finishes, that you do include a recommendation for me to go away and do the benchmarking, and then forgive me, but at least it'll be recorded in the minutes, and I can, when I go back and look at the minutes, I'll be able to, it'll refresh my memory to do it, to do the benchmarking and to check the position on what options the council may have if the decision is to pay for the training.
Thank you. I think, yes, Martin can put forward a recommendation for that, I'm sure. Okay, so we've completed the other thing on the report that I just wanted to come back to is, sorry, I'm going up and down in my report here. The item about the working group on the changes, which I note that Henry hasn't also been able to bring forward. That item was outstanding and we were hoping to have made progress. The review of the code of conduct, which I think is on bottom of page 5 of the report. January, we resolved that we would set up a working group with the hope that we would put any changes that needed to be made before annual council, but that hasn't been completed. Henry, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I'm still waiting for one group to give me the nominations. I know that there's been correspondence circulated from, I can't remember if it's the LGA now or I think it must have been the LGA, effectively encouraging and asking councils to adopt the model code at their annual councils. I know there are some that are waiting until after, and not least elections, but there are some who are waiting until after within Devon. I was on a call the other day there where it crops up. So there's a sort of there's a difference of approach being adopted. Crucially, I don't think anybody should be rushed into it. I know they may want it, and I know it was part of the Committee for Standards in Public Life. Part of the difficulty is that the LGA were going to issue guidance to help with its interpretation, which, without it even being used, raises a few alarm bells, doesn't it? They're immediately having to issue guidance about it. So I haven't seen that come out yet. It may well have done, but if it has, it's only very recently. And I think you need to have that and be able to do the comparison against our existing code before anything happens. So obviously we're heading into a fairly difficult period of time, not least with the virtual meetings position. What happens? Everybody trying to get through annual council, the elections. So my advice would be that we get through the elections, we reset, and then it's on the forward work programme for the next few meetings of the Standards Committee to get to grips with that with the working group. It's not necessary to adopt it from now. It's just desirable from the LGA's point of view, I think. But what's important is you get it right for this district. So I think that work is necessary, and it's right to wait, get the working group constituted, and then bring it through the Standards Committee.
So can we make sure that we minute the fact that that is an item of work that's being carried forward then, that review of the code of conduct?
Yeah.
Because I had written down a question about where is it on the agenda, because it wasn't on as a separate item. And then I picked it up as just a mention in the report. So we must drop that action.
Yeah, definitely.
So if we go back to our recommendations, I think we need a proposer for recommendation 1, and a seconder for that one, because obviously we've got to do different things with each recommendation. Councillor Rylance.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to propose recommendation
1.
Who would like to second it?
Is there a seconder for that, or can I second? I'm not sure. Given that we're so low on numbers today,
Yes,
I'm not sure who can propose a second.
Can I just remind you that you were going to take an informal vote of the representatives ahead of decisions, just as a reminder.
Oh, good point. Very good
Good
point.
point. Good point.
And then the other thing is just on that point 1, that proposal is on the basis of the amendments that we've just discussed in terms of. So if I can just quickly remind you, the typo that's been identified on the flow chart, the inclusion of informal resolution at stage 1, plus the other typo that's there, the reference to ex parte Lashley in the sanctions to give the extra protection that you can't preclude a council from carrying out their role. And I think that was probably it. Yeah, that was it.
Thank you. Do our independent members just want to indicate whether they support? Thank you. And I know Bob kindly sent an email saying he did support it, even though he wasn't going to be at the meeting, which is very sweet. Martin?
Can I just say a few words? This does have my support, but I did have some difficulties over this particular proposal, I've got to be honest. And I spent a lot of time worrying actually about which way to go as an independent co-opted member, charged really with trying to represent the views of the public. On the one hand, I fully understand the pressures on Henry and his team, and we can see the growth in the number of complaints. And for that reason, extra resources do need to be brought to bear, and this proposal does have my proposal. But I've got to be honest and say that I am genuinely disappointed that we consider this necessary, or we've had to consider this necessary, because what we're agreeing, or what the committee is agreeing, will increase the resources, it will increase the time spent dealing with complaints against councillors, and the public may well be saying, well, surely councillors should be devoting most of their time to delivering services for the public in East Devon. So, as I say, I just wanted to be honest and be true to the role I'm performing. That yes, I do support this, but I do have reservations because I think an ordinary member of the public would be a little concerned that we are putting more resource to dealing with complaints against councillors when they might well regard there being higher priorities.
Thank you, Martin. Yes, I absolutely hear that, and if this goes ahead, I'm going to be quite interested to see the impact that it has, that maybe by members discussing complaints that are being brought, that may have an impact on people not bringing perhaps what we might think of, I don't like trivial, but complaints that are more, they're around disagreements between people rather than actual proper bad behaviour type complaints. And I think that's going to be quite interesting to see how it works out. Pauline?
Yes, I completely agree with Martin. In 20 years on East Devon, I have never ever seen so many complaints. And I feel very sad about that because I was on standards before, and I just feel very sorry for Henry, and I agree he does need more resources for the number of complaints that are going through. But I'm really sad that it's come to this state because it never used to be like it. I just feel very sad about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Pauline. So we have a proposer for recommendation 1. I can second recommendation 1 if that's appropriate. We should have a vote, although the vote is now slightly strange, but we should have a vote.
It is rather, isn't it? Yes. Perhaps you move it from the chair next time, and then that gives us a degree of uncertainty about it.
So we should just take our vote just for appearance's sake, shouldn't we?
Yes. Oh, shall I do it then? Yeah, sorry, I was. So all those in favour, if you could please raise. Let's just do it by raising of hands, shall we? I think we can see. If you can do it by raising of hands, then Eleanor, I can't quite see your hand.
Oh, she's put the green tick as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Recommendation 2 is the recommendation to recruit an additional lawyer. This also follows the Cabinet Minute 354. Henry, are there any other comments you need to make on this one?
No, thank you.
Our independent people, are you happy to support this? Thank you. I'll move this this recommendation.
Okay, so all those in favour of recommendation to council to support the additional lawyer post, can you raise your hands, please? Thank you. That's carried.
On item number 3, I think that was the one where we were hoping that Martin might give us some wording for a recommendation for just simply for Henry to come back with a report. Is that how you want to handle this one, Henry?
Well, I'm very happy if that's what the committee would like, yes.
I think so. So we'll add that as a recommendation for the monitoring officer to do a review of other councils' procedures in the way of training as a sanction.
Yeah.
I'll move that as a recommendation.
Okay, so all those in favour, if you could raise your hands, please. Thank you.
And the last item 4 was simply the thanks for Alison, which I think we already recorded at the start of the meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we've concluded item 7.
Thank you.
Item 8 are the Code of Conduct complaints update. We have firstly the update for the 1st of January 2020 to the 31st of December 2020. Henry, do you have comments on those, please?
Well, yes, so it's been excuse me, it's been acknowledged. Obviously, there's a backlog there. You can see there's no magic wand to suddenly make that, other than me dedicating all of my time to it, which just simply isn't feasible at this moment in time. So I have to acknowledge again and apologise, as I have previously, that we're in this position. A couple of them have closed since this was issued, but obviously until all of last year's are closed down, you will keep receiving the update for last year. Let's check, they are separate on the agenda, aren't they? Because this year's is a separate item, I think, if I remember rightly.
Yes.
Yeah. So I have to say, within the bunch for last year, there are a couple that will run for some time yet because of the complexity and the difficulty. Perhaps going back to the point from Martin earlier about the external investigator, several of those have gone out to an external investigator simply because of the complexity and the difficulty that they present, although it's still with me at the relevant stage. And 4 of them in here are those kind of cases. And I can, there is absolutely no way that that's something we would have been able to deal with, just by the very nature of what they are and what they allege and the amount of evidence and information that comes with it. So I'm afraid they're going to drag on for quite some time, I think, those, and they are 13 through 16. But otherwise, I'm happy to take any questions there may be about it. I mean, it's quite detailed in terms of where we are at the various stages and what's happened. So hopefully, the level of information there now gives you the sort of bit of flavour and sufficient detail for you to get a feel of it all. But yeah, happy to take any questions there may be.
Thank you, Henry. Are there any questions from committee members? Or anybody outside at the moment? Oh, Eleanor.
I just wanted to say, Henry, you're doing so much. Don't beat yourself up about this at all, because you have done, this is partly why we need somebody else, isn't it? Because you have so much work on, and we are conscious of this, and we know you're absolutely doing your best. So please do not beat yourself up about this at all.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm just
it's
very
been the worst year ever as well for everybody. It's
been a tough year, yeah. I'm just very conscious that for those who are in it, that period of time, uncertainty is difficult. I absolutely understand that. And it's for them actually really that I'm apologising, because it's not a position I would want to be in, and I know people want to have it resolved, but yeah, it is what it is, and that's why I'm apologising. But thank you, I appreciate it.
Henry, do you I appreciate that there are a lot of complex ones, and particularly, you know, we have a difficult political situation at EDDC, with things being so finely balanced and therefore quite heated, but also we have one of our town councils for a particular range of issues and complaints. So we're probably in a bit of an unusual situation here. Do you prioritise any of these complaints that are going through the system and have been for quite a while, if they're based on the nature of the issue? Because I know that some of these are complex, but some of them are also potentially more serious than others. Do you prioritise the work effort in any way related to that?
Yes, well, I reasonably can. Yeah. I mean, I'm dependent on various factors throughout the whole process, and that includes the engagement from those who have made the complaint, those against who the complaint is made, those who are involved as witnesses. And I'm not in any way saying this in a critical way, but then I always have to go and talk to Alison. So, you know, there are various stages and processes, all of which take time. But I am very dependent on people's input back to me. So, notwithstanding prioritising those where one may say it's more serious, if somebody doesn't engage or it takes time to get the answer, I'm still going to be beholden to that in terms of how long it takes to get an outcome. I will say, if there's an easy win, I'll take it. If I can get one closed down quickly and get it dealt with, then absolutely. But otherwise, I will try and prioritise serious ones. But on the whole, they will flow through in a fairly routine time.
Is it true then that some of these complaints, which have been in the system for months, I mean, I'm looking at one that's dated the 2nd of July, and you know we're heading rapidly to the start of May this year. How often is it the case that the delays are there more because people involved in it have been too slow in putting in properly completed forms, responding to questions and so on? Because it seems that, of course, that's so easily weeks are lost waiting for people to come back. Can
you tell me which one it was in July?
Oh, well, I don't know if there's a particular example on that one. I'm just picking up a date of one that's hanging since the 2nd of July. Yeah. How often, I don't know that that's the problem here, but I am aware where you said about you're still waiting, is that actually holds up the whole process for everybody?
Yes. Well, yeah, to a degree. That one was quite. So I think the case you're referring to is C18 from 2020. That's quite peculiar in that for a significant period of time, it looked like we were going to be able to resolve it, and then at the end of the day, we simply weren't. So it has then moved on. So there was quite a hiatus in that one when it looked like things were heading in the right direction and we were going to be able to sort of get it closed, and that just simply hasn't come to pass. The ones later in 2020 have simply been down to the work. Honestly, it's been down to my workload at the back end of last year and the early part of this year that has prevented them coming forward and being dealt with. It's the balance between trying to deal with the day-to-day work and also go back and get through some of these. So, I mean, my plan, for what it's worth, is assuming council agrees next week that the new regime is to be brought in from annual council, is to have the process set from annual council that, you know, because there are timetables in the process that we will rigorously adhere to and sweep up behind as quickly as I can. So I will be dedicating days to clearing back from end of 2020 and the beginning of 21 to get those cleared down, because obviously from annual council we're going to be on a new process with a much tighter time frame, and to a degree I'm going to have to prioritise getting the current, or will be then the current timetable met. So I mean, that sounds slightly unfair as well, doesn't it? But I'm acutely alive of the need to clear back and get down, to clear off the backlog that's there and get them resolved. But I mean, we'll come on to 21, but there are a number there which are just sat waiting because they're either with an investigator or I'm waiting for further information to come in. And as I say, I'm slightly beholden that July one is it was a very a very unique case, I think, actually, in terms of where we got to.
And I think it's important for other people perhaps watching this to understand as well that, of course, Henry's workload isn't just standards, that we know that there have been other things going on through the end of last year, the beginning of this year, that took his time, that obviously also has had an impact on managing standards complaints. So the delays in the process are due to many reasons and many causes for that. And it isn't just the fact that there's been a massive wall of standards complaints that's been bogging everything down. It's a complicated set of factors.
It's a number of factors that contribute to it.
Yeah, indeed. I see a hand raised from the dark from Councillor Arnott.
Yes, sorry, I'm in the darkness, Chair. You wouldn't want to see me today. We've got terrible internet connection, so I'm just doing it like this. First of all, just like to associate myself with comments from Councillor Rylance to Henry. Thank you for all this today, and you and I both know why you've got this backlog. I mean, you know, it is ridiculous. From a member perspective, I hope it's helpful to maybe, you know, I was just thinking about what Pauline has said as well. The last year, there are no excuses connecting to the pandemic. There aren't. We've never made any. But we have been meeting on Zoom, and the intensity of the meetings has been quite extraordinary. I've honestly lost count of the number of meetings I've chaired. And by and large, the behaviour of members is extremely good. But can I just say my view that what might be described as male, pale and stale elder men with anger management issues do mess meetings up quite often. They cut across the chair. I think the chair of this meeting perhaps smiles with recognition when she has to chair full council, and that has been very difficult, and that has caused trouble and misunderstanding, and I think that's then led to erroneous, potentially erroneous complaints. I think another key factor that is coming through, and I'm referring, Chair, in a way to both these agenda items, both this current report and the next one, is member officer relations. So we've got to look very carefully about what is warranted and fair criticism of officers by members. And it's an extremely difficult line to tread. So, for example, if you watch the average planning meeting, you will quite often get an elected member with steam coming out of their ears saying, this report is a disgrace. I don't understand how you've reached this conclusion. It's absolutely preposterous. This is an inversion of all that we stand for and goes against the local plan, the neighbourhood plan, and blah, blah, blah. Now, traditionally, that has been, I suppose it's been tolerated because it's planning and that's where it is. The question then becomes, if a member has something else to say on another subject and it disagrees profoundly with a decision or a recommendation that's come from an officer, how is that member meant to say that without appearing and standing accused of either A, bringing their office into disrepute by unwarranted criticism of a member in defiance of the member officer protocol, or B, even, which is a very fresh, it's a topic for this committee, isn't it, of bullying, which is very serious indeed. And I've got a feeling that that's what might be coming up as a theme in the next chunk of reports that Henry will make at the moment. So we really need to think about that really deeply. And I'm really serious about the member officer thing. There must be respect at all times, but how is a member to raise very legitimate concerns when they think an officer has simply got something wrong? Because if they can't say that, in a sense, what is the point of being an elected member? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Arnott. I think that's quite a good point about member officer relations, and perhaps the training that members undergo when after each election, and a reminder of how it's appropriate, of course, to raise concerns about what's being done, but doing it in a polite and appropriate way and not falling foul of any kind of potential complaint. And I think often it's in the tone of the voice and the words that are used, and also the situation. If somebody makes an outburst at a public meeting, that may not be appropriate, but making that comment, in an email or in a smaller meeting may be a more appropriate way. Henry, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sorry, I'm busy playing with emojis. I can't quite work out what I'm doing with my thumbs up. So sorry about that. I was trying to put my hand up. Yes, it's probably right for the next item. But all I was going to say is that more often than not, it's not the what, it's the how, and it's an expression I'm using quite a lot of late. Is fair criticism is absolutely acceptable within the standards regime, and those who are on interviews on Tuesday will recognise my question. But effectively, you've got a tiering of sort of acceptability. So councillor on councillor councillors are expected to have a thicker skin than everybody else when it comes to criticism. You know, it's acceptable for councillors to be criticised, essentially, provided it's within certain bounds. So as you then head down into sort of officers, well, senior officers are expected to have a thicker skin than junior officers, and to an extent, the junior officers shouldn't really be involved in those kind of things. It is the senior officers, but they don't have a thicker skin as councillors. And then you've got members of the public who don't have a thick skin at all, in my view. So you've got a tiering of sort of how you treat your behaviour. But no matter who you are addressing, you've got to be mindful of the what versus the how. And so it is acceptable to be critical because that's your role as councillors. It absolutely it is justified at times. There's no doubt about that. It's just how you go about it as members. And I'm very keen, and I've said it to various people, that the member officer protocol is reviewed, because it's a very long document, and actually you can, if you look hard enough, find conflicts. Say, well, it supports me over here, but doesn't support me there, and you can find some difficulty. So I think it needs to be looked at. And just touching on the how, in terms of it's okay to be cross with, to be, using the word disgraceful, for example. It's okay to express frustration at things, provided it doesn't then become a personal attack. It's when it starts to transgress to the criticisms of the officers directly, as opposed to something else where problems go. So there's no hard and fast right and wrong to some of this stuff. But I do agree that the member officer protocol is something that we've got to look at again, and it would fall with the purview of this committee to do it. So I would very much welcome a recommendation to that effect. But as I say, I think probably you might want to do this on the next one, because I'm just going to make some very, very comments which are self-evident from the report, which would justify it.
Thanks, Henry. Pauline.
Thank you. I was just going to say, if you something that you disagree with an officer, I always used to look at it, the officers were the experienced ones. I was there to learn from them. And so, therefore, if you've got an agenda and there's something on an agenda that you don't agree with the officer, then you go and meet him in private and try and find out the reasons why he's put those forward. And I think often when you get to a meeting, if you know the reason why it's been put forward, then that sort of takes the heat out of it. So I think, people have got to learn to respect the officers, because at the end of the day, they're here long term. Councillors are only here for 4 years. And once they're gone, the East Devon continues to run on the officers. So you must always respect the officers, because they're the people that keep East Devon going, whether you like it or no.
Thanks, Pauline. Yeah, I think Henry's point too is it's about how things are said and when they're said. And of course, members should be able to criticise, recommendations or information that's come forward if it's not right. That's what we're here for. But how you do that is really important. And I think the other thing that we have to be careful of is that we've known before, we've discussed in standards already this year and last year, is patterns of behaviour. And if we see a particular officer is getting criticism repeatedly in different ways, perhaps from different people, that can become a pattern. It doesn't just take one person to do bullying or harassment. It can be done by a group. And that's something as well, is that, it might seem quite innocuous that a councillor criticises a report from an officer, but if another councillor makes another criticism of a report from the same officer, actually, is there something else? And it's very hard. And we know at standards, we've discussed this in meetings before, very, very difficult. but we all want to make sure that our officers are protected from undue personal criticism and pressure, that they are able to do their job, that they do give recommendations freely and fairly based on their experience and their knowledge, and that members are also free to review those recommendations and decide whether they agree with the findings or not. And it's all done in a calm and professional way. And that's what I'd love to see, is calm professional behaviour rather than things that verge on the personal, which always gets us into trouble. Henry, I don't think there are any recommendations to be made on item 8. Martin?
Thank you. I just, through the chair, wanted to ask Henry whether it might be possible to add an additional column into this report that shows the complaints that have come in, to show the source of the complaint. I don't mean by name, but to categorise. I think the three categories, obvious ones, are a member of the public, a councillor, or an officer, so that we just know just a little more. We don't want to compromise the confidentiality involved, but I think it would just give an extra layer of information to looking through this list. If we did see whether, for example, most of them, as I suspect, are from other councillors, and those that are from members of the public, or even occasionally from officers.
Henry?
I don't have a particular problem. My only worry would be the officer column, in that, depending on how much information goes into the remainder of the table, the extent to which you might be able to work out. So I think in combination within the table, if you accept that by doing that, I might then reduce the information that's in the other columns, in case there's a risk that it identifies, then
on that basis, Henry, given that I see that concern that it could be to the point where you can identify, would it be possible to just have two options in the source? So the source being either a councillor or other, and other is public or officer. So at least we separate the two, and that then would mean that it really shouldn't be possible to identify. Would that help?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Or you can just just give me a degree of discretion to be able to say I'm not going to say in this particular case, or have that anyway. Bear in mind, of course, that assuming council agree next week, this committee is going to get a lot more of the information anyway. And I have to say that I've tried with my those who've been supporting me to come up with a table to try and make it as easy as possible. I think the way this needs to report through now, we need to really hone and refine the reporting aspect, but through flowcharts to work as well. So I'm going to relook at it to make it as easy for everybody, including the committee, and make sure you get the right information. So it won't necessarily look like this going forward, but for now I'll add it in, and I'm happy to sort of leave the three categories in, and I can either say other, where it's not appropriate to provide a officer or a member of the public, or you just give me a degree of discretion not to say it in certain cases. But otherwise, I'm happy to do it, sure.
Yes, thanks. Is that all right, Martin?
Yep, very helpful, Henry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think the other thing that struck me about that table for item 8 was the fact that you had to scroll down through quite a lot, where in the end it was resolved and the case was closed, to pick out the ones that were still open. They're not sectioned off, are they?
No.
So the still open ones could be in a section on their own, and the ones that drop to closed and over in a separate group, then it makes it much easier to see how much work is still outstanding.
Yeah. So I just it's just a fabulous table with it's just a table in numerical order essentially. So yeah, I'm happy that we distinguish between open and closed. Fine.
I think so, because what we were actually interested in is the outstanding ones, as well as being able to see the ones that have been resolved.
And I'm conscious also a very long table, and ideally I'd like to try and get more of I hate Excel personally, but I'd try and get more to an Excel where you've got the drop downs for code, paragraphs, and hopefully just try and make it a slightly more, dare I say, a professional table that's easier to flow across. So that's what I want to look at, is just to make sure, because I want to be able to use it myself as well. I'm currently operating within just our folders within our networks, rather than we've got a new legal case management system I'm going to start using as well for it. So hopefully we're going to hone and refine this to make it much better, and that will reflect in the presentation of the information as well.
That would be very useful, I think.
Yeah.
So do we want to move? I think we can move on now to agenda item 9. Complaints, code of conduct complaints update from the 1st of January 2021 to the 31st of March 2021. Henry?
Yeah, so I mean, similar really. The reason, I mean, you may look at that and say, well, there's not much information there, and that's right. And for a similar reason, really, at this point in time, you'll recall in the procedures you just discussed and put forward that at certain stages the subject member may not know for a while whilst further work's happening. Well, quite a lot of what's happening in this table reflects that. So, but what I really wanted to highlight was that the first 9 complaints there all relate to East Devon District Councillors. I appreciate it doesn't say where they've come from. It's fair to say there's a mix. I think probably certainly councillors and officers. But it is reflective of a difficult situation, isn't it? We've not been faced. I've not been faced with a situation where the first 9 complaints in a year are district council. And I don't think I've been faced in the last 6 years or so with a situation where I've had 9 complaints against a district councillor for the entirety of the year. I suppose perhaps if you go back to last year, but that's again probably indicative of the situation we're in. And I just wanted to flag it really. And I know the membership is not naive to this by any stretch, or doesn't understand the situation. But it would be remiss of me not to say it. And what Councillor Arnott was saying just now about the member officer protocol, well, that's one part of the jigsaw. And the other is the extent to which the committee may wish to consider other options about having another training session, or potentially asking the group leaders, or whether there are other initiatives to have a meeting with me to discuss it, or amongst themselves to encourage it, just to start to try and grasp some of these issues and see how we can work through them, because it's not a particularly pleasant situation to be in, is it, for anybody, frankly? And if I speak from a purely selfish point of view, particularly me, having to deal with them all. But more importantly, and most importantly, I don't think the public are going to be particularly impressed seeing the number of complaints that involve the district councillors, as opposed to potentially town and parishes, which has hitherto been the case. So I know more information will be welcomed. That will follow, of course, but at this stage, I simply flag that that's a large number of complaints against district councillors, and I think the committee should take that seriously and have a think, not necessarily for a resolution today, but have a think about how we might take that forward. Certainly, as Councillor Arnott said, and I would welcome a recommendation that we review the member officer protocol. But as I say, that's only one part of it, I think.
Thank you, Henry. I think in some ways, I'm not surprised that there are a lot of complaints, and I'm also surprised in the way there aren't more. I've actually myself wondered about putting in complaints about members' behaviour, towards me. And I just think, well, no, I just have to sort of accept that I'm supposed to have that thick skin, and I won't put in a complaint. I think behaviour, and Councillor Arnott mentioned this, I think behaviour over Zoom, whether it's a bit like social media, that thing about you're sitting at home and you feel you can behave in a particular way that you wouldn't do in the chamber, is a little part of this. I don't know. Things have certainly got extremely heated at various meetings over the last few months, and not surprising that also then leads to complaints. It's disappointing, but also understandable when you see what goes on. So I think looking at it from the outside, it presents a particular picture that may not be reflective of the situation. I thought that there had been an attempt for the leaders to get together to talk about the issue of complaints and behaviour. Councillor Arnott, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I was going to come to that. Yes, I asked all group leaders about 5 or 6 weeks ago, I think it was now, to meet to discuss this. And I see there's another group leader present, and he was kind enough to agree straight away that he thought it was a good idea, and one other group leader did as well. But there was no take up beyond that, unfortunately. So it would be yeah, it would be helpful if you guys sort of gave us a hint, almost to the point of an instruction, to sit down and do this, and I think that would help. And you know, we were very keen to have Henry involved as part of that process as well. I think throwing in another one, which might not always be obvious to people who aren't members of the council, is the facility to use group email. And it's far too easy. We've all got email, and all we have to do is tap in a certain, you know, number of letters, and we're sending an email to all members. We can send an email to all staff, almost, or not all staff, soon as at the same time. And it becomes an irresistible temptation for some. And, you know, depending on the content of what they pump out there, you're then sitting there with your fingers crossed, praying that nobody will respond to it. And inevitably, you know, one or two of the usual suspects will come back mortally offended. And the next thing you've got the internet on fire with councillors quarrelling with each other and breaching this, that, and the other all over the place. And it's certainly discourteous. So that would be something, you know, it would be lovely if you could help us think about whether, you know, without in any way being censorious, whether councillors need to develop their own protocol about when they use that mass email facility, which I've used myself as well. And I suppose in one in 10 occasions, I probably sometimes think maybe I shouldn't have done that. I think we you know, a lot of us have done that. So that would be helpful. I think, again, going back to Henry's point, which is that these are unique times and so forth, and this is an unprecedented amount of complaints from regarding district councillors. It is absolutely crucial that we drive that down as a matter of urgency. And I tried to identify earlier what I think are the key issues. I think the key issues have been about how members and officers are getting on with each other. And I think there is a thing which is Zoom, and I think there's a thing which the chair has identified, which is that it's a very finely balanced council politically. And it comes from very different cultural places. So the newer councillors, many of whom, well, I think most of whom are within, you know, my larger group, so to speak, they're a lot younger, there are a lot more women, and I think they have different expectations about behaviour. And then there are the older councillors, many of whom have got absolutely immaculate manners, but there are a lot of real bruises out there as well. And so I say that because that goes to the point of Henry's saying, is more training needed? And I think the answer is yes. I think it is, but it doesn't just apply to new members. It applies to teaching old dogs new tricks as well, in my view. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thinking about the comment about all councillor emails, and I agree. My time on the council, I've seen numerous occasions where all councillor emails have descended into an appalling row. But perhaps that could be something that could be discussed at a group leader meeting, is to agree for the group leaders to suggest to their own group members that they really tie their hands down rather than pitch in to an argument in an all council email exchange, because I think that might help rather than it coming from the committee here. That might be a better way of doing that. But I think, yes, I mean, I think the recommendation from us that the group leaders do get together to discuss ways of reducing, you know, it's not about reducing complaints, it's about how do we help improve the behaviour that therefore will reduce the number of complaints, and consideration towards other members and consideration towards officers is important on all sides, from everybody.
Chair, can I come back very quickly on that before I know Henry's waiting there?
Very quick.
Very quickly. So the example that would particularly worry me is, in absolute truth, I have more or less stopped, and I'm nothing special, but I am the leader of the council, and I get information that comes in that I desperately think should be distributed to everybody. So whether it's from an MP or from a government department, or it's a change of COVID policy or something, I'm not one to think that I should just have it. I put it out to everybody. I've stopped doing that. I've stopped doing that because I'm thinking, well, who's going to kick off? Who's going to kick this off? So it's actually now become I'm self-censoring because I don't know, what's going to happen next. And as you were saying, Chair, very often I probably would have a ground for going to a code of conduct complaint, and I've bitten my lip, a dozen times about those things.
Yeah. Yeah, and it absolutely should not be having the effect of censoring communication, because, we do sometimes need to communicate things to all councillors. It's important that everybody is aware, rather than some being kept in the dark because they're not involved in a private conversation. So it shouldn't result in censorship. The responses from other people need to be more tempered, not to stop people communicating in the first place. Henry.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I won't get into some of the nitty gritty. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to do so, given the role and the rest of it. But I mean, in broad brush terms, Councillor Arnold's got it. I think there are a number of different dynamics to this. Member Officer Protocol would welcome recommendation in that regard. I do think you could have another protocol actually in relation to social media and council. Or I suppose you could call it email policy, but councillor communications or something like that, because it's a very diverse group of councillors, but certainly social media is a very difficult area, and I know the committee, it must have been back in 15-16, I should think, maybe slightly after, specifically included wording regarding social media in the code of conduct. But actually, I think it needs more than that, because it's very easy to be, forgive the term, but a keyboard warrior, and it's very easy to bang things back through Twitter, Facebook, which has got the succinct, and it can be a very aggressive and nasty place. And I personally think we probably need something that's more prescriptive towards the use of social media, and yes, happy with communications generally in email terms, about how that's conducted. Because a lot of what I have been seeing is through those sort of channels, rather than the face-to-face or Zoom or whatever. But certainly it's the less direct, more indirect approach, which is having quite a lot of the impact. And I think that would be a good thing. And whether that's initiated through the group leaders or this committee or both, I think that will be a really good tool to have a much more prescriptive approach to those channels of how councillors communicate. They're not communicate, sort of engage.
Thank you. Any other comments from anyone else? So I think Henry suggested we should put together a recommendation for the monitoring officer to review the member officer protocol. I see Henry nodding. And also that we recommend that the group leaders hold a meeting to discuss ways of perhaps tempering behaviour to better respect the code of conduct, perhaps considering the use of all councillor emails and social media communications in order to achieve that, with regard to respect between members and other members, as well as members and officers, because I think that would be a useful meeting to have. Is there a way that we can ask the group leaders to feed back to this committee? Would that be appropriate, Henry?
Well, if you want to use me as the conduit to do that, that might be the best way to do it. I'm happy if the leader wants to do it, but it just makes sense for possibly to come through me. I mean, I'll start looking at not wording, but just sort of doing a bit of research towards a protocol for the social media type of stuff anyway, to help inform those kind of conversations. But it strikes me that's quite an important pillar to it, I think. Yes, I was just going to flag, although you may recommend, just to note, it might not happen until after annual council, just to give the heads up.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense anyway at this stage of the year, yeah. Definitely. Okay, so how do we, I'm happy to move a recommendation for the monitoring officer to review the member officer protocol, if that's acceptable. And do we need to vote on that?
I think if you could, but do you want to ask the independent and the town and parish reps first?
Are you happy for that review to take place? Thank you. And should we vote on that by waving our hands? In favour?
Thank you.
Thank you. Not very good for the audio, all this waving. And I think then secondly, a recommendation that group leaders convene a meeting in the next council period, so after the annual meeting, to discuss ways and means to temper behaviour between members and officers. Is that acceptable? I can move that recommendation as well. Do the independent people support that idea? Thank you. Hands are raised. And voting on that, are we happy to support that recommendation? More hands waving. It's like a silent meeting. I feel like I'm interpreting mime. Thank you. I think that's covered every item on the agenda. So are we finished, Henry?
Do you want to note that either that you can note that I'll start looking at the social media and the communications bit, but whether you want to ask the group leaders to think about that as well, or whether you just take
Yes, and also obviously that Henry's involved in the group leader meeting process so that he can feed back to the committee on anything that needs to be done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. That concludes our business today. That brings our meeting to an end. I'd like to thank everyone, including any members of the public watching online, for taking part. However, can I remind all those present that the supporting officer will confirm when the meeting is no longer being recorded or going live. And until then, your comments will be live to the public. Thank you, Alison, for your